The need to write down the rules of any given society goes back to the very dawn of history. For the most part, law did not extend beyond the realm of a particular ruler or culture. Eventually, it came to include an international aspect with the advent of treaties. Later, conferences and commissions reached agreements which set borders, territorial changes, and other standards. However, unlike the courts established in various states, many of which go back centuries, the idea of having international courts is quite recent. During the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, numerous courts were established to deal with increasingly volatile conflicts and complicated international arrangements. Some of these bodies are geographically specific to serve the needs of particular regions or even continents, the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, and others. Others were functionally specific to deal with issues such as maritime law, nuclear power, or more often, trade, finance, and other economic issues. Human rights issues are also a major concern. In this presentation, I will be examining 8 courts that have been instrumental in establishing global judicial standards. These bodies have been particularly significant to many traumatized populations. Co-capital of the Netherlands along with Amsterdam, The Hague is a center of international judicial activity. First and foremost of the organizations located there is the International Court of Justice. Several institutions preceded the International Court of Justice. The Palais de Justice, or Peace Palace as it is better known, was completed in August 1913. Scottish-American industrialist Andrew Carnegie donated what would today be $1.5 million to build it. The first occupant of the Peace Palace was the Permanent Court of Arbitration, established in 1913. Following the First World War, the League of Nations established the Permanent Court of International Justice, which had its first sessions in 1922. Following the Second World War, the Permanent Court of International Justice became the International Court of Justice, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration was absorbed into it. All of these courts would be based at the Peace Palace. 15 judges decide cases amid the splendor of the palace. Over the years, this court has decided many cases and set precedents which have governed the course of international law, including matters ranging from asylum to genocide, borders, citizenship, maritime rights, differences in local laws, and the proper arbitration of disputes. The post-Second World War United Nations system is a complex network of organizations, some dating back to the League of Nations and beyond. As the United Nations principal judicial body, the International Court of Justice continues to operate from the Peace Palace. However, since its establishment in 2002, the International Criminal Court, also based in The Hague, has become an equal partner with the International Court of Justice. I will be discussing the differences between these courts in a bit, but first I want to note why this system needed to be changed. The International Court of Justice was designed to settle disputes between nation-states. Following the Second World War, the need to try individuals for criminality was underlined by the brutality of that war. Special military tribunals were established, the most famous being the Nuremberg courts in Germany, and less famous, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, set up in Tokyo, Japan. Though both of these courts were short-lived, they came up with many precedents which continue to be emphasized today and served as a proving ground for various modes of jurisprudence and procedure. Though Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, Stalin, and Mao were never called to account for their crimes, as we will see, the world is getting closer to calling its highest leaders to account. Mass death at the hands of political movements did not end with the deaths of Hitler and Stalin. Decolonization and eventually the breakup of communist nations led to further atrocities. This was particularly evident as Yugoslavia disintegrated. A new term emerged to describe what was happening: ethnic cleansing, shown here also in Croatian. Long used in the Balkans, ethnic cleansing became a popular media term, but still lacks legal definition. It describes attempts to remove a particular group from an area, not to exterminate them, but to seize their assets. Hence, from 1993 until 2017, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia was established in The Hague to try crimes associated with the breakup of Yugoslavia. The International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia indicted 161 individuals, of whom 90 were found guilty and sentenced. Another 19 were acquitted, 13 were referred to courts in former Yugoslavia, 37 procedures were terminated, in many cases due to the death of the defendants. No fugitives remained at large. One of the most high-profile cases was that of Slobodan Milosevic, former president of Yugoslavia, who unfortunately died before going to trial. Two of the last fugitives to be tried were Radovan Karadzic and Radko Mladic, both of whom were found guilty. The tribunal faced many challenges. Among the worst possibly was that of the case of Vojislav Šešelj, who went out of his way to show disdain for the court by piling up as many contempt of court charges as possible. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment, which was commuted due to his ill health. However, he faced many years in court, answering his contempt charges. My students and I were able to sit in for part of his trial. In 1994, the same year that the terrible crimes committed in former Yugoslavia came to world attention, around the world, in Rwanda, similar events occurred. In a period of only 100 days, over 800,000 lives were lost. This rate was faster than any period in Nazi Germany. Furthermore, this was accomplished by the low-tech means of machetes and other small arms. In April 1994, just as the genocide was getting underway, the UN Security Council called for the creation of a body to investigate human rights violations in Rwanda. By November that year, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was created. It was modeled on the Yugoslav Tribunal, and by 1995, it was established in Arusha in northern Tanzania. Located on the western slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, Arusha had become a major international center for Africa. The tribunal had a number of successes. The first person to plead guilty of charges of genocide was Rwandan Prime Minister Jean Kabenda. Pauline Nyatramashuku would become the first woman to be convicted of genocide. Two other cases proved to be very significant. One was that of the mayor of Tabu, Jean-Paul Akayasu, who would be found guilty of 19 counts of genocide. This case would prove that genocide could include rape. Another important case, which essentially proved that Rwanda was in fact a genocide, was the Radio Machete case, in which, in 2003, the tribunal would prove that a number of journalists and other media figures would be using government radio to foster the genocide. This showed a clear intent. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda faced many difficulties, not the least of which was the sheer number of cases. It is estimated that over 150,000 genocidaires, or perpetrators, were in fact never brought to justice. Furthermore, there was a lack of funding and well-trained staff. Following the genocide, Rwanda itself was left with fewer than 24 judges, lawyers, and other legal professionals. Unlike the Nuremberg trials, in which there were 2,000 investigators, the Rwandan tribunal only had 50 investigators. Their work was slowed down, and as a result, by the end of 1998, 28 indictments had been issued and 7 were convicted. This reinforced skeptics believing that the pace of justice was too slow, and it furthermore complicated an already troubled relationship with the Rwandan government. Funding for the court was increased to the level that it became one of the most expensive judicial investigations that has ever taken place in history. Some would see this as an expression of the world's guilt for not acting sooner to stem the genocide. The mandate of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda ended on the 31st of December, 2015. Here is the final record of the court at the time of its dissolution. Relations with the Rwandan government deteriorated, particularly over the court's handling of rape victims. As an alternative, the Rwandan government set up several hundred gacaca courts, made up of local individuals who had some legal training. Banned from handing out death sentences, these courts proved to be major corridors to truth and reconciliation. In the 21st century, Rwanda has maintained a high-growth economy, a stable government, and revitalized legal, educational, and cultural institutions. Nevertheless, it remains a deeply scarred society. After the Second World War, criminal tribunals were all set to expire at certain dates. There was a need to establish a permanent court. This was accomplished by the Rome Statute of 2002, which set up the International Criminal Court to try individuals for 4 classes of crimes. Often regarded as the most serious of crimes, genocide comprises activities that intend to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. This can take many forms, including killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to bring about the group's destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births, and forcibly transferring children. For many years, crimes against humanity were vaguely defined, until the Rome Statute establishing the International Criminal Court specified 15 crimes. These can occur against civilian populations either in wartime or in peace. Predating the United Nations, war crimes are grave breaches of the 4 Geneva Conventions. Not recognized for many years, Crimes of aggression are crimes which cause wars. The International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court are profoundly different. The International Court of Justice was established by the UN Charter, and all members of the United Nations automatically become its members. It has no jurisdiction to try individuals. It is a civil court settling disputes with the consent of member states. The International Criminal Court was established under the Rome Statute. It has individual membership, which nations can opt out of, and it tries individuals for genocide, war crimes, and so on. It is a criminal court, and as a result, prosecutors initiate proceedings. One similarity these two courts have is that they do not have any judicial superior, which means that their judgments are final. Like many international organizations, the International Criminal Court has a complex structure. This simplified chart better shows the composition of the court, which includes an assembly of state parties, the court itself, and the trust fund for victims. The assembly of state parties consists of representatives of all member states. They oversee the court, elect judges and prosecutors, and approve its budget. The court itself has a president and vice president who conducts relations with member states, assigns judges and cases, and oversees the registry. 18 judges in pretrial, trial, and appeals divisions conduct all proceedings. The Office of the Prosecutor conducts preliminary examinations, investigations, and prosecutions. The registry is actually a record-keeping bureau, but goes beyond this in that it conducts other administrative, non-judicial activities. Unique to the International Criminal Court is its trust fund for victims, which implements court-ordered reparations and provides physical, material, and psychological support to victims and their families. The court was first housed in the former headquarters of a Dutch telecommunications company. Several times I took classes to attend briefings and sessions there. On the 14th of December, 2015, the court moved to its permanent headquarters on the northern end of The Hague. It is located in the international zone, not far from the Peace Palace and the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. The court employs over 900 personnel from about 100 countries. The International Criminal Court maintains a liaison office in New York City to connect with United Nations headquarters. It also has a number of field offices throughout the world in countries where investigations are being conducted. As the International Criminal Court got underway, many of the cases, in fact a majority, were from the African continent. Some have perceived this to be an anti-African bias. In fact, African countries, along with Europe and Latin America, eagerly signed on to the Rome Statute. This brought attention to the instability that has occurred since decolonization. A more recent map shows how cases have been pursued beyond Africa in places as diverse as the Ukraine, Burma, the Philippines, and Venezuela. They were added to the earlier cases of Georgia, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. Major countries, including the United States, Russia, China, and India, have not signed on to the court. and as a result, inequalities in the handling of cases will continue for some time. Not far from the court's headquarters is the ICC Detention Center. This facility is not used to enforce sentences, but rather to hold suspects for trial. Those who are convicted are sent to and housed in prison space provided by individual member nations. The detention center provides safe, secure, and humane custody, and tries to ensure the mental, physical, and spiritual welfare of all detainees. The International Committee of the Red Cross is the inspecting authority for the detention center and has unrestricted access. The court is limited in a number of ways. First of all, it only has jurisdiction over crimes that were committed after the founding of the court on the 1st of July 2002. Territorially, its jurisdiction extends to state party nationals, crimes occurring in the territory of a state accepting the jurisdiction of the court, but also crimes that were referred to the prosecutor by the United Nations Security Council. This means effectively that any country could be subject to its proceedings. These limitations on jurisdiction may seem excessive. However, the court is meant to try current cases rather than delve into historical grievances, which would no doubt lead to an insurmountable caseload. Unfortunately, this means that cases such as South Sudan and others rooted in communism and colonization will never be addressed by this court. The second class of limitations is that to do with complementarity. The ICC is intended to complement, not to replace, national systems, and it prosecutes cases only when particular governments are unwilling or unable to do so genuinely. Finally is an issue which faces many United Nations bodies, and that is cooperation. The court does not have its own enforcement body, but relies on the cooperation of its members in making arrests, in transferring arrested persons to the court, in freezing assets, and enforcing sentences. It tries to build understanding, but ultimately it only stretches as far as the member states are willing to allow it. Of all international courts, the International Criminal Court has the most promising future. As such, I want to look at its processes and case management at length. The legal process consists of 6 stages before a prosecutor can investigate any case. A preliminary examination must consider matters such as sufficient evidence, jurisdiction, gravity, complementarity, and judicial interests. When finally investigating a case, the prosecutor must collect and disclose both incriminating and exonerating evidence. The defendant is considered innocent until proven guilty, and the burden of proof lies with the prosecutor. At all stages of the proceedings, a defendant has the right to information in a language that he or she understands. In the pretrial stage of the process, judges issue warrants of arrest and ensure that there is enough evidence to pursue a case. This is in many ways equivalent to the function of a grand jury in the United States. Before a case goes to trial, defendants are referred to as suspects. But once a case is committed to trial, they are then referred to as the accused. The trial judges hear evidence not only from the prosecutor and defense, but also the victim's lawyers, and they render a verdict, and if found guilty, a sentence and decisions on reparations. Most cases within the system are appealed, either by the prosecutor or by the defense. If a case is closed without a guilty verdict, it can be reopened if the prosecutor presents new evidence. This is very much like the system in Scotland, where 3 verdicts are possible: guilty, not guilty, and not proven. Not proven means that the prosecutor did not prove the case, but it remains open. The International Criminal Court does not prosecute anyone under the age of 18 when the crime was committed. Furthermore, it does not try individuals unless they are present in the courtroom. This makes it different from many international courts, which have often tried particular criminals in absentia. One particularly challenging case is that of Sudan, and particularly its westernmost region of Darfur, where the government of Sudan was in a protracted armed conflict with various groups there. Following an April 2003 attack on a major airport in the region, President of Sudan and Commander-in-Chief of the Sudanese Armed Forces, Omar al-Bashir, and other high-ranking Sudanese leaders agreed to a counterinsurgency campaign. The main component of that campaign was to attack civilian populations, largely of the Fur, Masalit, and Zagawa ethnic groups. This campaign was conducted by the Sudanese Armed Forces, police forces, the National Intelligence and Security Service, Humanitarian Aid Commission, and various allied militias. This campaign involved crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. This included acts of pillage, murder, extermination of thousands of civilians, rape, forcible transfer of hundreds of thousands of civilians, acts of torture, and the contamination of wells and water pumps. Other ethnic groups and even foreign interests were encouraged to resettle in lands previously inhabited by members of the targeted groups. The chief architect of these human rights violations was Omar Hassan Ahmed al-Bashir, military dictator of Sudan for over 25 years. The International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest as early as the 4th of March 2009, when he was charged with many war crimes and crimes against humanity. A second warrant of the 12th of July 2010 would add to these charges that of genocide. In total, Bashir would be charged with 5 counts of crimes against humanity, 2 counts of war crimes, and 3 counts of genocide. The court has often seen member states not complying with their requests. A May 2019 judgment of the Appeals Chamber found Jordan, a state party to the Rome Statute, had failed to arrest and surrender Bashir when he was on Jordanian territory for an Arab League summit in March 2017. In a similar case, the court requested information from the government of Uganda on why Bashir was not arrested when he traveled there. This request has gone unanswered. Meanwhile, the Sudan suffered tumultuous changes. Leaders of a more than 3-year period of transition to democracy stated that Bashir would be transferred to the International Criminal Court after the completion of his corruption and money laundering trials. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. By February 2020, Sudan's ruling military council agreed to hand him over to the International Criminal Court to face charges. However, in the meantime, another trial began which examined the coup which brought Bashir to power. In October 2020, an International Criminal Court delegation went to Sudan to discuss Bashir's indictment. The government agreed to set up a special court to try Bashir. However, the Sudan has declined into chaos ever since. Another outstanding arrest warrant is for Joseph Kony, leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. This rebel movement grew out of the Acholi people of northern Uganda, who had been consistently kept out of power during pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial times. This movement is famous for capturing over 30,000 children who were forced to become child soldiers. Driven out of its homeland, the LRA moved into South Sudan and later into the remote border area where South Sudan, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo meet. Some of Kony's supporters have been arrested and tried, but so far he has eluded all attempts to bring him to justice. Russian President Vladimir Putin is also subject to arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court. It is very unlikely that he will be brought to trial anytime soon because of the power he commands and the fact that he doesn't travel to any countries that are party to the Rome Statute. The Special Court for Sierra Leone was established to try cases stemming from Sierra Leone's long-term civil unrest. This was the very first international tribunal to be set up in a country which had witnessed human rights violations. Nevertheless, certain high-profile cases were tried in The Hague. One such case was that of Charles Taylor, who, as president of Liberia, is believed to have stolen or diverted nearly half of the national treasury. Fleeing his native Liberia, he went on to establish a movement in Sierra Leone, which ultimately was accused of many crimes against humanity, including acts of terrorism, murder, atrocities against personal dignity, rape, slavery, mutilation, the use of children under age 15 in armed groups. It was in Sierra Leone that the term blood diamonds was first used to describe gems which were illegally mined and used to finance conflicts and weapons purchases. In August 2010, British supermodel Naomi Campbell made an appearance at Charles Taylor's trial, where she was called upon to give evidence on blood diamonds she received from Taylor in South Africa in 1997. On the 26th of April 2012, Charles Taylor was convicted on 11 counts. On the 30th of May, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison to be served in the United Kingdom. The Special Tribunal for Lebanon had a very narrow mandate. It was set up to specifically investigate the bombing assassination of Lebanese President Rafik al-Hariri. It ultimately indicted and tried in absentia 4 Syrian-backed Hezbollah terrorists. In 2010, the United Nations set up the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. The courts for Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Lebanon had specific time limitations. This allowed the continuation of proceedings in cases that went beyond the court's expiry dates. This body operates from the former offices of the Yugoslav and Rwandan tribunals in The Hague and Arusha, respectively. One of the great accomplishments of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals was the arrest and trial of Felician Kabuga, one of the outstanding Rwandan genociders. The ultimate goal of the International Residual Mechanism is to concentrate all proceedings in order to allow future prosecutions to be conducted solely by the International Criminal Court. Few are satisfied with the slow pace of any process which brings justice. One only needs to look at the example of the case against Omar al-Bashir. Whether based upon codes or precedents, legal systems look to what has been done in the past and are naturally slow to change and should be. As someone deeply concerned about human rights abuses, I would hope international courts will go beyond determining culpability and punishment and begin to deal with the difficult issues of reconciliation and trauma resolution. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that were established in South Africa, Liberia, Peru, Canada, and other countries have been steps in this direction. The International Criminal Court's Trust Fund for Victims has gone a significant way to give ongoing permanence to alternative forms of justice. However, the wheels of the international system turn slowly, but hopefully carefully.